welcome all of you to the launch event for the 4th Universalist Plastics Challenge. Many of you recall on March 8th, which was our last service where we were all in person together, the environmental justice team kicked off a recycling and composting effort in which we talked about the UU 7th principle, respecting the interdependent web of life that we all share. And we talked a bit about plastics during that presentation on March 8th. And the fact that less than 10% of plastics are actually recycled, and that 8 million tons of plastics enter our ocean every year. And of course, if we're in New York City, that means into our waterways. And, you know, seabirds of all species, sea turtles, all have traces of plastic. 51 trillion microplastic particles are in the sea, which is 500 times the amount of stars in the Milky Way. Pretty staggering. And it's not just an environmental issue, it's a racial justice issue. 75% of all New York City solid waste, including plastics, is processed in communities of color. And around the country, 79% of incinerator facilities are in communities of color. And it's also, of course, a global issue. 68,000 shipping containers of American plastic are processed in countries that mismanage 70% of their waste. So we're shipping our problem overseas. And July is Plastic Free Month, which is a global movement to help all of us reduce single-use plastics. And about 250 million people are participating in that. And here at 4th U, we're gonna try to participate as well with this 4-week plastics-free challenge to see if, as a community, we can make an impact and reduce our single-use plastic waste. And we're gonna be here for you. The environmental justice team is gonna work with all of us who participate, not just those on the Zoom call, but those who also have signed up for the plastics challenge that couldn't make it tonight. We're gonna support each other. We're all gonna be in a Google group, share resources, and every week we're going to send out a small challenge to everyone that will hopefully help us reduce our plastic footprint. And to kick off the plastic-free challenge, we welcome a very special guest, a friend of 4th U, Krista Avampado, someone who lives in the neighborhood, walks their dog by 4th U, and met Eileen and got interested in some of the justice work that's being done here and wanted to help out with our plastics challenge. Let me just tell you a little bit about her in the introduction. Krista is a graduate of University of Pennsylvania with an MBA from University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. She's an entrepreneur, a scientist, a storyteller, writer. She recently completed her studies in Arizona State University's graduate program in biomimicry, and is in the process of applying to PhD programs in sustainable urban development. And her current research, and the reason that she's joining us here today, is focused on the development of a durable bio-based plastic that at the end of its useful life can be broken down through a low energy process into components that are benign and preferably beneficial to surrounding ecosystems. And she directed a short science documentary called Beyond Plastic, which I hope many of you have seen. We did send that out before, but we'll share that link again. It was recently named a semi-finalist at the Vienna Science Film Festival. So we're very, very excited to welcome Krista. She's gonna talk about her research, share some information, and then later in the program, she'll take some questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Krista.
Great, Brett, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here. A lot of times people think, oh God, do you research plastic? How depressing, which is what some people say. And sometimes it is, but I will say, you know, even though it can feel sometimes daunting for people to think about the plastic waste issue, if we can make gains, we reduce the amount of plastic we use, we develop alternative materials to replace plastic, we can have such an enormous beneficial impact on the environment. So even though it is, in these times of adversity, if you go to where the adversity is and you are able to make improvements, it's almost like a lever, right? Like you have such an enormous impact by making changes here. So I really applaud all of you for wanting to learn more about plastic, and then also reduce the amount of plastic that you use in your daily lives. So I'm going to go ahead and I have a short presentation that I'll go through pretty quickly. I'm happy to take questions at the end of it. I don't know if you want to shout them out, or if we want to, have people put it into the chat, and I can go through it at the end, whatever you think is easier for people.
Yes, put them in the chat. We'll monitor that and then direct them to you later.
Okay, awesome, great. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with all of you. And then I'm going to put us in presentation mode. Can everybody see that? Yeah? Okay, great. So as Brett said, my name is Cristal Ampado. I am a biomimicry scientist. I am also a writer and a business person. I was a writer and a business person before science came into my career in a more formal way. But I always had a passion for science. And so that's what sort of led me to bring it in to my work. My pronouns are she, her. Sorry, I should have said that at the top. And let's go ahead and get started. So I want to start with some good news. So anytime I do a presentation, I always try to do a positive sandwich. So I do something very positive. We talk about stuff that's difficult, and then we talk about some positive things at the end. For those of you who saw the film Beyond Plastic, that's also how Beyond Plastic is structured. It's actually how any good narrative is actually structured, any book. You see the hero of the journey, or the heroine of the journey in the beginning state. They have an inciting incident. Things go crazy, and then at the end they triumph. And so I hope that that's also our story with plastic, and you'll see why in just a moment. But I wanted to let you know that just by living in New York City, you're already doing something great for the environment, which might sound weird because maybe you don't think of New York City as like the bastion of environmental sustainability, but we actually are. And there's lots and lots of reasons for that, which we'll go into in the next slide. There's also a lot more, even though we're doing great as a city and as a state. New York State is actually one of the most sustainable states in the United States, in the Union. And part of that has to do with the leadership that we have and have had, and also because people here are very mindful of the planet. I grew up in the Hudson Valley on an apple farm, about 2 hours north of where I live now. As Brett said, I live on the Upper West Side, and I go by your congregation's building most days because my dog loves to walk by there. So we're going to talk a little bit about New York City and why it's so great for the environment that you live here. So we have a very small personal real estate footprint. And this is really, really important. So we live in tiny apartments stacked on top of one another. So we are this very skinny island. Manhattan Island is about 11 miles-ish. Roughly north to south, and we cram millions of people onto it. And city living is actually great for the environment. As we see more and more people moving to cities. COVID has, upset that a little bit, but I think that we will eventually course correct that. And I think we will continue to see a rise in people who live in cities for lots of reasons. But for the environment, it's great because you actually leave more of the planet wild by living in a city. So if everybody was spread out equally, we would actually have a greater impact on the planet. In New York, we also walk, we bike, we take public transportation. I cannot tell you how fantastic that is that we have that in the city. Hopefully we will continue to have that. I hope the federal government comes through for the MTA. Cross your fingers. We're trying. Because cars, and particularly cars that run on gasoline, are actually very detrimental to the environment. So the fact that many of us don't have a car, or if we do have a car, we don't use it that often, is really fantastic for the environment. One thing that surprises people to know is that New Yorkers, we have a tremendous recycling program. Now, recycling is sort of the bottom of the 3 R's. It's reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce is really, really important. Reuse is really important. recycle, we try to never get there. So that's sort of our goal in this idea of Plastic Free July, in reducing your plastic footprint. You want to really focus on the reduce part, reuse, and then recycle. We have a great program. It's actually contracted out to a company called Sims. And as Brett was saying, a lot of our processing actually happens further out in the outer boroughs, not here in Manhattan. Sims has a huge facility out in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Some of you might live near there or have been to Sunset Park. It is an enormous facility. Before COVID, you used to be able to go and take a tour. So you could see all of the wild machinery, and you could walk on the recycling floor and see how they sort all of the recycling. It's really, really fascinating. Those tours will actually come back eventually. Right now it's just for workers. They're not allowing the public in, but eventually they will allow the public in. And what they do is they sort all of our recycling, and then they ship the recycling someplace else to actually be processed, like put into the recycling process. They are really just a collection and sorting place. New Yorkers actually recycle 50% of our plastic. Brett was saying that, the national average is about 9%. We recycle 50% of what we could recycle. And so normally 50% is a failing grade, but in terms of plastic in New York City, we actually are recycling 5 times more than the average people in the rest of the country. So this is a really fantastic thing. We could do more. We could get towards that other part of the 50%. But I do want you to know that we are doing great as a city, and we will continue to do more and more, hopefully with your help. So just as a way of sort of a little icebreaker, what are some great things about plastic? Well, we'll talk a lot about what's not great about plastic, but what are some of the great things about plastic? You can unmute yourself and just call it out if you'd like to. I'll open up the little here. Great things about plastic. Anybody?
Medical devices.
Oh, medical devices. Yes, most healthcare. We would not have modern day healthcare, and this is absolutely true. We would not have modern day healthcare without plastic. There's no way we could do it. And one of the reasons for that is it's very sanitary. It's very easy to clean. I gave blood this morning at the New York Blood Center. There's a lot of plastic at New York Blood Center. You go into a hospital, all the tubes, the IV bags, ventilators, respirators that everybody's talking about with COVID, that's all made out of plastic. And really hospitals, they couldn't run without it. So yes, it's great for our healthcare. Other things that are great about plastic.
It's very versatile and malleable. You can put it in all different shapes and sizes.
Yes, it's amazing. We can and do make everything out of plastic. I mean, literally injection molding, we create these little plastic pellets, we melt them down, we shoot them into an injection mold, and we can literally make anything that our imagination can come up with. It's very, very, very malleable. You also have some properties where it's very flexible, right? So if you think about plastic wrap, you can put plastic around anything, right? Like you can wrap, or it can be a highly rigid container. We build construction materials out of plastic, right? Like if you have plumbing in your building, some of that plumbing is probably plastic. So yes, it's highly, highly versatile, and it's partially because of the malleability, because of the flexibility, and because you can process it in all kinds of different ways. Yep. It's also really, really durable, which is actually like its blessing and its curse. It's great that it's durable, but oof, it is durable. And Brett was talking about the microplastics. That's basically, you can think of it as like microscopic pieces of plastic. Sometimes you can't even, they're so small you can't even see them without a microscope. They're in our soil, they're in our water, they're in our food supply. Anytime you wash your clothes, so a lot of our clothes have plastic in them. So another thing about plastic is that we call it nylon, or we call names, right? Which are just trademark names for types of plastic. Most clothing that you wear has at least a tiny percentage of plastic. So if you have a really soft t-shirt, chances are there's plastic in it. And every time you wash that t-shirt, a little bit of the plastic leaches out into the water. You can buy a filter for your washing machine, PS, that takes out a decent percentage of those microplastics. So that's something that you might want to look into. Just one-time easy fix, take some microplastics out of the water. But it's everywhere. You know, walk around your house and it is astounding how many things you will find that are made out of plastic. And we're going to talk about some hidden plastic in a little while. But the next thing we're going to talk about, I'm just going to close this window here again. Oops. Is we're going to talk a little bit about some flim flam. So there are lots and lots of plastic myths that are out there. And so we're going to debunk some of them, not all of them. Some of them might also come up in the Q&A, but I just wanted to lay out a few of the big ones that'll help us get our minds around, like, what is plastic, where is it hiding, and how do we get rid of it? So the first statement that a lot of people use, like, plastic has been with us like forever. It's been here for such a long time. Like, there's no way we can get rid of plastic. It's just part of our lives. It's part of humanity. It's been here for a really long time. It actually has not at all. So plastic was an innovation, grew out of World War II. So in World War II, you have the Axis forces and the Allied forces. Most of the rubber that the US economy was using at that time came from Southeast Asia. During the war, Japan controlled most of Southeast Asia, meaning they controlled most of those rubber plantations. And so US troops could not get their hand on rubber for anything. And so scientists actually invented plastic as a part of the war effort. The war ends in 1945. The Allies win, great. But we have this plastic innovation and we had to figure out what to do with it. And so mass production for consumer-based plastic, so plastic like you and I use, didn't really start until 1953, which is not that long ago. Like, my mother remembers times like that we didn't have any plastic, right? My mother was born in 1941. And so, and it took a while for plastic to really catch on. It took another few years for people to really realize what they could do with plastic. But it hasn't been with us for that long. So that's kind of good news, because it means there used to be a life before plastic. And it gives us some hope that, like, humanity can exist without plastic. Don't worry, it can exist. And we're kind of on our way to getting back to a plastic-free world with alternative materials. The next one is plastic is made in a lab. And so for that, scientists sort of made plastic from lab. Most plastic that we use today, with the exception of a few bio-based plastics, which we'll also talk about in a bit, it's a byproduct of fossil fuel. So oil and gas companies had a waste product from their processing plants, and it was the basis of plastic. And so they had two choices. They could either spend a lot of money to get rid of this waste product, or they could find something useful to make from the waste product. And so they went the latter route. And they started, there was their fossil fuel lobby group is very, very strong in the United States. The plastic lobby group is just as strong. So there was a whole new industry that grew out of it, oil and gas, that became the plastics industry. All plastic is the same. So this is another one where we do talk about plastic as a general term, and that's totally fine to talk about it that way, because calling it by its scientific names would just be crazy. But all plastic is not created equal. So anytime you have something made out of plastic, not anytime, a lot of times you flip something over, you have a yogurt container in your fridge, for example. You flip it over, you'll find that there's a little triangle, and in the middle of the triangle, there's a number. And that indicates that there are about 7 different types of plastic. They all have very different properties molecularly. So in terms of the elements in the periodic table that the plastic is made from, and the arrangement of those elements are different. And because of that, they have different mechanical properties, and that means they have different uses. So this is a table, just a very quick table that shows these 7 different kinds. Number 7 is a little bit of a misnomer because it's just other. It's kind of a catch-all for things that we don't have a place to put things. But these are different types of plastic. This is the number, of course, and the symbol. This is sort of the shorthand. You'll hear people call PET. You'll definitely hear PVC. That's pretty common that people hear. This is the scientific name for this type of plastic. And then here are just some uses for this plastic. And for those of you who were not here, 5 to 10 minutes before we started the presentation, this presentation that I'm giving you is open as a Google Doc. So after I finish the presentation, I will go ahead and put that link in there. So you're welcome to go back and visit it and take a bigger look, take a longer look at this if you'd like. All plastic can be recycled. So as long as I recycle, using plastic's fine. And I hear this a lot. The whole recycling effort really got started, really started to take off in the 80s. And that was actually started by the plastics lobby and the fossil fuel, oil and gas lobbies. They really wanted people to use more and more plastic, but they knew people were getting kind of upset that they were generating a lot of trash. And they're like, you know what? We will put a lot of money into these recycling programs. And if we do that, more people will feel better about using plastic. Forget that we can't really use a lot of this stuff in recycling. There's not really a market for a lot of this recycled material, but they'll feel better about using it. We'll sell more plastic. Everybody will be better off. And that is exactly, that's exactly what happened. So most of the time, only plastics with the number 1 and 2 are recyclable. Sometimes plastic number 5 is recyclable. Plastic number 5 is what we really use to make a lot of the rigid plastic containers. So if you go to the dairy section of your grocery store, most of that is plastic number 5. It's called polypropylene. That happens to be the specific plastic that I study at the moment. And sometimes that is recyclable, sometimes it is not. In New York City, we actually do take plastic number 5. After it leaves SIMS and heads elsewhere in the world to be processed, whether or not it actually gets processed is a little questionable. But unfortunately, all of the other numbers of plastic are not recyclable. They take hundreds of years to break down. And then as they break down, they actually leach into our soil, our water, our air, and our fuel. Unfortunately, a lot of plastic is also incinerated because there's so much of it. And those fumes end up in the air. Not only do they contribute to global warming and greenhouse gases, but breathing them in actually causes higher instances of asthma, which we definitely see in the developing world. Or if you happen to live near a plant that incinerates plastic, you will actually find much, much higher instances of COPD, asthma, and respiratory illness. So that's all documented scientifically, and it is directly linked to incinerating the plastic and even just processing plastic to recycle. So recycling is a pretty dirty process. There's lots and lots of things that are wrong with recycling programs. I could give a whole presentation on what is wrong with recycling. I'm not going to do that tonight. But just know that that's why recycling is lower on the totem pole, so to speak, than reducing our amount of plastic and reusing the plastic that we do have. That's why recycling is really the third R. As Brett was saying, we export a lot of our trash as a whole, but especially plastic trash. China used to be the main place where we would send our plastic for possible recycling. A lot of times that plastic would get thrown in the ocean. I'm very sorry to say that, but the plastic didn't get used. China, about 18 months ago, decided that they were not going to take our plastic anymore, or some provinces were going to drastically reduce what they used to take. So we started shipping most of our plastic to Malaysia, and so did everybody else. Malaysia is this star down here. The problem is that Malaysia is an island nation. And they're a small nation. And so what happens is most of that plastic is also getting dumped in the ocean. So not only are we exporting the problem to other people to deal with when it's our trash, but we are also exporting it to places that actually can't possibly manage it. And so that's why when you think about plastic and you think about solid waste and trash issues, they actually are very, very much social justice issues, right? So it's literally the developed world exporting all of our trash problems to the developing world, and it is making it impossible for them to develop. It's causing them health problems, causing them economic problems, and environmental problems. And so it's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to reduce the amount of trash and plastic trash specifically that we generate. I want to talk to you a little bit about bio-based plastic. And so this is plastic that's made from corn. Sometimes it's made from soybeans. There's a lot of different, what you would think of as food crops that you can make plastic out of. And it's a very long process to get there, but you can do it. And so this was another push, again, by the plastics lobby, again, by the oil and gas companies, even though it wasn't an oil and gas derivative, that they wanted people to feel, okay, well, environmentalists are upset about plastic. Let's just make bio-based plastic and that'll be fine. It's not at all, for a couple reasons. So one, that the crops that we use to make bio-based plastic are actually really harmful to the land. So in indigenous communities and First Nations communities, we have what's known as the Three Sisters crops. So we have corn, beans, and squash. When you grow those crops together, they all help one another and the land is not depleted. What we have done in our Western society is that we are very much a monocrop agriculture society. So a farm or an orchard grows one type of crop. Let's say it's corn. That is very, very detrimental to the land. So that's the first thing that's wrong with bioplastics. It's also taking land away from agriculture, taking land away from species. A lot of times trees are cleared, natural vegetation is cleared to make way for these crops. The other problem is that once this plastic, even if it comes from corn or soy, once it goes through the process of becoming plastic, which is called polymerization, basically we take a whole bunch of molecules, we shove them together, polymerization, make plastic. Once it becomes that bioplastic, it's actually just as detrimental as fossil fuel-based plastic. It takes just as long to break down most of the time. Sometimes it's a little bit less, but it's still going to produce microplastic. It's still going to produce pollution in the oceans and the soil and our food supply and our air, and it's still going to be a problem. So this bio-based plastic is really a misnomer. They really should just call it exactly what it is, whether it's like corn-based plastic or soy-based plastic. But really what we need to do is replace it all altogether. Which we're gonna get to in just a second. But the next thing I want to talk to you about is like, how much plastic have we made since 1953? So if you go back to 1953, you add up all the plastic we've made up to the year 2020. It is a staggering amount. We have made 8 billion metric tons of plastic. So I like to use this metaphor, which I think metaphors are really helpful because you think, oh, like, what does 8 billion metric tons mean? So an adult elephant is about 1 metric ton, about 2,000 pounds. If you gave, and the population of the world is about 8 billion people. So everybody here, everybody in the world gets a pet elephant, make that elephant out of plastic pound for pound, and that's how much we've made. The really scary thing is about 6 billion metric tons of that 8 still exists in its original form. And so it takes so long for this to break down. It's just a tremendous amount of plastic and it's growing. That's the thing. It's not like it's leveling off or we just say, you know what, 8 billion metric tons, that's enough. You got to just use what we got. We are seeing an exponential level of growth in plastic production. So that number is not slowing down at all. Did somebody have a question? Oh, I thought I heard somebody. Okay. So what we need is actually something much, much better. And so this is where my research comes in. And again, like you think about this problem and it's so enormous, but there really is a lot of opportunity if we can come up with an alternative material. And I like to think of, can we make a material that has all of the virtues of plastic? It's malleable, it's flexible, our healthcare system, it's lightweight, it's cheap, it's durable. Can we make that kind of material but not have it have this really detrimental impact on the planet and on the environment? And that's really what we're going for. So we need this material that comes from a local renewable resource. It easily biodegrades without harming the environment. And so that is exactly what I do, and my collaborators do. So I work with a nanoscientist who is up at the Advanced Science Research Center. So those of you who live in Harlem or go to Harlem regularly, there is a huge, beautiful, incredible lab up there that does all kinds of fascinating research, but there's a nanoscience lab. The head of the nanoscience lab there is my collaborator on Beyond Plastic. And he's a professor at CUNY. And so we are doing a lot of work to try to come up with this alternative material. He also has a postdoc in his lab who just defended his PhD successfully, which is very exciting, at the University of California, Berkeley. And he is helping us create this new material that we call Beyond Plastic. And so if you go to beyondplastic.nyc or the short film that was sent out, that will tell you a little bit more about what we're doing. So we don't have Beyond Plastic yet, right? We are still in lab phase. We're developing the prototype. It has a lot of promise, and we're really excited about the early results. Unfortunately, COVID really hit at a time that we were just starting to really make some strides with the prototype, and the lab had to shut down. So it's just starting to reopen because, thank you, New York, we have flattened the curve, which is very exciting. And so once we get our lab fully operational and reopened, we'll be able to go back to that research in earnest, which will be at the end of this month, early August. But until we have Beyond Plastic, we have an alternative material. What we really need to do is reduce the amount of plastic we consume, reuse what we do consume, and then finally recycle what we're not able to reuse and what we do need to live our lives in the present moment. These are just some easy things that you can do. Some of these are one-time switches. Some of these are things you have to be cognizant of all the time. I think having a mix of them is good. I don't go anywhere without a reusable shopping bag. It's always in my purse wherever I happen to be going. I haven't bought a plastic water bottle beverage in years. So using these reusable water bottles or reusable cups is really, really helpful. Also, we have a lot of to-go containers, lunch containers, disposable cutlery, and straws are also really detrimental to the environment. They create a lot of waste. Also skipping the produce bags, like you don't need them. You're gonna wash your produce when you get home anyway. So if you can skip bagging them in the grocery store, that actually really, really helps. Slow down and dine in. That was a little easier before COVID. Hopefully we'll get back to dine in restaurants again soon. But using glass jars. Glass is actually a great alternative to plastic. Glass is infinitely recyclable, so you can recycle plastic hundreds, thousands of times, and it doesn't break down. The thing with plastic, when you recycle plastic, and again, I won't go off on plastic recycling for this presentation, maybe at another time for those who are really interested. One of the problems when you recycle plastic is anything that's a recycled plastic container is usually made from about 50% recycled plastic at the most, and the rest of it is new plastic. And the reason for that is every time you melt down plastic, you actually degrade the quality of the plastic. So if you had a totally recycled plastic container, 100% recycled plastic material, let's say you wanted to store your yogurt in it, that container would be very likely to crack or crush or split, and it wouldn't be that helpful, right? Your yogurt's gonna end up all over the floor. So what we do instead is we add some fillers, we add some new plastic in addition to the recycled plastic. And so even when something is a recycled plastic container or recycled item, it's only partially recycled material, because plastic, in the end, like, it hangs around on the planet for a long time, but it's not really useful for a long time, which is one of the problems. Another thing you can do is just share easy tips with your friends and your family. And you would be surprised how much, like, somebody saying, so me saying to you, hey, you should reduce your plastic. Like, I hope all of you listen to that. That would be great. What is more impactful is if somebody that you know and love who's in your life says, hey, these are 2 ways that you can reduce the amount of plastic that you use. So I hope that as you go through this challenge with 4th that you actually will share it on social media, that you'll share it with your friends. Like, hey, I'm doing this today. Like, I'm not buying bottled water anymore. I've decided I'm not going to do that anymore. And you would be surprised how much those word of mouth testimonials actually really help people make different changes. It's sort of like when you're trying to improve your eating habits. If you have a buddy to improve those eating habits with, there's research that shows you're much more likely to stick with those better habits. Like, you have a walking buddy, you have a gym buddy. That buddy system also works with plastic and with reducing our trash, reducing our environmental footprint. So if you can get a buddy, that is super, super helpful, and you'll bring somebody else along for the ride. These are just a few ways that I have personally reduced my plastic footprint. I have some props here that I can show people. So this is actually a silicone Ziploc bag. So I used to use Ziploc bags a lot. They're super handy. They're super convenient. That's another thing about plastic. I bought this set of 10, I think, on Amazon for like $8 or something. And these can be used thousands of times. I literally just, I put a little dish soap in there, some water, shake them up, pour them out, rinse, and they're fantastic. They're super durable, and I can reuse them over and over and over again. Which Ziploc bags you can reuse a couple times. These I can reuse like hundreds or thousands. So I've already taken a lot of plastic out of the stream that way. Also true for these baking pan liners. So some of you might have these. This is also made out of silicone. And I just use these instead of tin foil. And that has actually also been a great save, because again, anything you can do to reduce solid waste trash, which tinfoil is a part of, is really helpful for the environment. I also don't use dryer sheets or fabric softener in my laundry anymore for lots of reasons. One, that stuff is terrible for the environment and the water streams especially. But I use these little things. So I just pop them in the dryer. They are made out of wool, and so they reduce static, they soften my clothes. These will last for years and years and years. They also reduce the amount of time that my clothes need to be in the dryer. So then that's also an energy save, which is great. We also have quite a few innovations that are happening in the past couple of years. So my hand soap and my spray cleaner now come in these little tablets. I can open these up. They're packed in paper, which is great. And they're literally just a little solid tablet. So a lot of times when we buy detergent, soap, spray cleaner, most of it is water that's put in plastic bottles, right? So this company called Blue Land actually makes these tablets. I literally drop this into a soap pump that I have that I'm just reusing from a previous soap purchase. I leave it in there for about an hour, and then I have foamy hand soap, but it doesn't have any of the environmental impact of buying soap bottles over and over and over again. That's also true for this multi-purpose cleaner. They make the same thing, which is very exciting. I have these beeswax wraps. You may have seen these. They sell them in Trader Joe's. They're essentially fabric that has beeswax on it. And I use this to wrap, let's say I have leftovers and I have it in a bowl. I put this beeswax wrap around the bowl, and instead of using plastic wrap, which is not recyclable, I'm sad to tell you, cling wrap is not recyclable. You might put it in your recycle bin, but Sims just takes it out and throws it in the trash. These I will be able to reuse hundreds of times also. They're pretty sticky, but they don't feel sticky on my hands, but they work just like cling wrap, so that is terrific. I also have a food delivery service from Imperfect Foods. Most of their packaging is recycled, or it is reusable, compostable, or they will take it back. They will take back the packaging when they come and they deliver my next food delivery in 2 weeks. So those are just some of the things here. I also do want to just do this plug about, one of the most important things that you can do, even if you don't change any of your plastic use. I hope that's not the case in Plastic Free July. But even if you don't, if you write to your government reps, if you write to companies that you patronize and ask them to use less plastic and less packaging in general, if you write to the governor, to the mayor, to your council person, filling out your census so that we have more money to do environmental impact programs is really helpful, and voting and really looking at a candidate's environmental voting history is really, really important. So even if you don't want to reduce your plastic intake at all, or you can't, sometimes that actually happens, right? It's difficult sometimes for people to lower their plastic footprint, and I'm sensitive to that. If you do these 3 things at the bottom, that also is a tremendous help. So please don't underestimate speaking out and really, standing up for the planet by wanting to reduce your plastic footprint. So I'll leave you with just a couple of quotes. One of them is by Albus Dumbledore, who I happen to love, even though he's a fictional character, is that this is really a choice. So plastic use is a choice, right? Most of the time. sometimes we can't help but use plastic. You know, we had the example before of the healthcare system. Right now, there's nothing we can really do about that, right? We need our healthcare system to be sanitary. A lot of it's built on plastic. That's just the way it is. But there are small daily choices that we can make that do have an impact. And that's really, you know, what this challenge is all about, is making a choice to not buy that thing in plastic. Instead, I'm going to buy it in glass, or instead I'm going to make it at home, or I'm going to just not use it. I'm just not going to eat that anymore. Even though I like it, it's in plastic all the time, or I'm going to eat less of it. I'm not going to eat it as much as I used to. That's also really helpful. Really just reducing the amount that you use in any way that you can does help. And that's a personal choice most of the time, that we can all make. The last thing I want to say is that the plastic issue that we have, you know, nobody came down from on high and gave us plastic, right? We made this problem as a society, and that means that we can mitigate it, and that we are responsible for mitigating it. And we do, you know, some people say, oh, it's too late to mitigate climate change. I've read some doomsday stuff, you know, from people. My personal opinion and the science that I have read has said there is still a window and there is still time for us to mitigate climate change. There's still time for us to improve the health of the planet, right? We see the planet regenerate all the time. And so as long as we don't wait, and so this is a little bit of a call to action, sense of urgency, the fact that you're here tonight is really terrific and it's amazing. And I really applaud you for doing it. We can solve this, right? Like, we can fix the plastic crisis. We made it, we can fix it. We just can't wait that much longer. And there are people in the world who are really counting on us to fix this, and species in the world that are really counting on us to fix this. And so thanks so much for having me talk to you, listen to me talk about my research. It's really exciting. And I'm happy to take some questions. Brett, I don't know if we should do that now.
Right.
Or if you're gonna have
Well, I think in the interest of time, for some people that may want to leave at 8, Krista, first of all, thank you so much for that inspiring and very enlightening presentation. But I want to kick things over to Eileen really briefly to lay out this plastics challenge that we're going to ask everybody to join us in. And then we can get back, maybe loop back to the questions using the first week's challenge, which is looking at our footprint and kind of look at it through that lens. So I can
go ahead and do a little bit of answering in the chat too.
Sure, that would be great. Yeah, okay. Multitasking.
Yep.
And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eileen, who's a co-lead of the Justice team here at 4th to kind of talk a little bit about this challenge and what we're going to ask people to do in this first week.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure I unmuted myself and you can hear me. Great, excellent. I know so many of you, but not everyone. So I just want to start by sharing my pronouns, she, her, hers. And I also want to remind people that in addition to you, and thank you for coming out tonight, we do have quite a few other people as well who will be joining us in the challenge. And I wanted just to start by saying that there are so many resources out there, huge number of websites, articles, films. And so we're trying to help you. We're trying to do the homework for you a little bit, so that you're not overwhelmed and you can actually move on to take some action. So I just am going to review the first week's challenge. There's no need to take notes because this will be sent out to you, I believe this evening, and a recording of this will be shared with you, I believe, tomorrow or the next day if you want to go back and look at the slides that were shown as well. So if you're already signed up, you are part of the Google group that we have formed, the Plastic Free 4th Google group, so that we can share resources, answer your questions, and support you along the way, as Brett had said. If you are joining us tonight but didn't have a chance to sign up yet, please share your name and your contact information in the chat box so we can pick that up. So for week 1, we are simply going to ask you to take note of all the plastic you consume in 1 week. So you can start as of like yesterday, Monday to next Monday, or today. I'm sure your plastic and other garbage, trash are still lying around. And to help you, figure out what have you used during the week. Obviously, look at your recycling bin. You might also be looking at your other trash bins in your apartment, right? Or your home if you're outside of the city at the moment, because not everything is recyclable. So a lot of plastic sometimes gets thrown into the garbage. And then at the end of the week, We're going to ask you to simply take 10 minutes to complete the plastic footprint calculator. And again, all this information we will give to you and provide you the links. And you're going to enter the plastic that you've used, and it will give you a number at the bottom, your plastic footprint. And then we're going to ask you to submit that amount to us on a form. Not to shame anybody, not for competition purposes, but just to help you establish a baseline so that hopefully at the end of the challenge, you can go back and do it again, and you may see that you've reduced it, or you may be able to already tell just because you have less things in your recycling bin. As you're going through the plastic calculator, you might have a couple of questions. For instance, at the very top, it says PET bottles, the water bottles, soda bottles. But if you hover over it, you'll see that it also includes plastic containers, like condiment bottles, plastic mayonnaise jars, ketchup bottles, things like that. And so you would enter that there. When I was entering plastic bags, I'm like, well, I don't use any plastic bags. And then I was like, oh, but I use plastic bags in my trash can. So I forgot to include that. The more time I spent like looking at it, the more I went back and realized I actually am using a lot more plastic than I had hoped I was. And things like yogurt containers are on the list as well, but anything that's comparable, you know, something that holds sour cream or a tub of cream cheese, they would also get into that same category. It's not going to be perfect. The calculator uses just the most basic plastics. And so we're all going to know like our actual footprint is going to be larger than whatever number we're actually given at the very bottom. And then besides collecting your plastic and monitoring that, we're hoping you can just do two other very simple things this week. One is to watch the Frontline documentary Plastic Wars. It's about 50 minutes. And you will see where all the plastic is going. And you will see what the plastics industry is or is not doing to address the problem. If you're like me, you might need to schedule it into your calendar, make sure you watch it, but I promise you it is so worthwhile, and I think it's going to really help you be motivated. And we've also included one article that takes about 10 minutes to read on the list as well. And then for those with kids, we've offered 2 additional resources geared toward children, a short 6-minute film. I'd like to advise you to watch it ahead of time. I watched it today and it's pretty distressing. So watch it ahead so you'll be able to carry on the conversation with the kids. It's animated, but Planet Earth is not happy. And then there's just a 10 short tips list for children as well from National Geographic. Again, the most important thing is to monitor how much plastic you're using. That is the #1 priority for the week. If you can't get to the other things, that's fine. But we're really looking for you to report back what your intake is, and we have a special form that you'll be able to share that information with us. And I believe that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen. And as Eileen said, you know that you're all going to get signed up for the Google group. You'll get an email with everything that she mentioned in the first week challenge, links to the calculator and the films and everything like that. Krista's been furiously typing in the chat box, but maybe a question I might ask you, Krista, is, you know, a lot of the questions that we're seeing here are about consumer choices, and in a lot of cases, the choice we have is a bad choice versus a less bad choice, perhaps. And I'm just wondering what is the mindset that you should have as a consumer when you're looking at products to buy?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's such a great point. And it's also, you know, it's one of the things that I always try to remind people is that we have actually been forced into using plastic by companies, right? So many things that you buy in the grocery store, for example, they don't come in anything except plastic. And your only choice is like to not eat that food, right? And then you look around the grocery store and you're like, oh God, I can't eat anything. Like, I guess I'm just eating bananas. Like, that's what I've got. And so this happens a lot. And so it's also important. That's why I think it's really important to write to these companies, to write to your representatives. It's one of the reasons why when I knew I wanted to work on plastic trash as part of my biomimicry work, my product development work, I could have gone with recycling. I could have gone with, reusability. Like there were lots of different options. One of the reasons that I went so far upstream with developing an alternative material was that if you don't develop the alternative material, then you're relying on people's personal choices, which they might not be able to make, or they might forget to make, or it's not as convenient. There's all kinds of struggles that you have with that. And if you can get to the company level where Chobani is no longer using traditional fossil fuel-based plastic to make their containers, but they're using Beyond Plastic, that has such an enormous impact. So I think as a consumer, one thing that you can do, if it is possible for you to buy in bulk, as opposed to like a whole bunch of tiny containers, if you can buy one big container of yogurt versus tons of small containers, you are actually reducing the amount of plastic. So that's one technique. If you can find alternatives to use, but that's really, as a consumer, you really are limited. For my research, I did a survey of 400 people, and it was only a one-question survey, which I love, because like, just tell me the one thing I really want to know. And the question was, if you want to reduce the amount of plastic that you use, what's the one biggest obstacle that you face to accomplishing that? Far and away, and I'm talking like 85% of people said, I go shopping, and when I have to buy something, I don't have a choice except to buy it in plastic packaging. I just don't have that option. And so that really drove a lot of my my research. So I would say buy in bulk, buy the biggest container you can possibly buy, try to find ways to reuse that container, and look for alternative materials. As a consumer, that's sort of the best you can do. And vote, fill out your census, and what else would you do? Tell a friend.
Mhm. And so one parting piece of wisdom, if you could, before we have to let people go at 8 o'clock. I know you've done some plastic-free challenges in the past, and
Yeah.
tried to reduce. What would be some tips you'd give people when they reach that stumbling block where they just can't figure out how to make that change?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very, very common. One thing that I think, Eileen alluded to it, of like just being mindful and conscious of how much plastic you actually use that's already more than most people do. Like, you are already ahead of the game if you're even a little bit mindful about how much plastic you use. And so I started thinking, like, okay, if I look around my bathroom, like, what's in here that I'm tossing all the time? So I have these, I got onto this like little, this is a razor, that my shower razor. So disposable razors, you just throw the whole darn thing out. And I was like, well, I don't need to throw the whole darn thing out. I just need to like replace the blade. Like, I can keep the handle. The handle's just fine. There are tons of companies. This company is called Billie, Billie. It's actually cheaper than just continuing to buy razors that are completely disposable, and then they just send me the new set of razors every month. I also do the same thing with my toothbrush. So toothbrushes are horribly polluting to the environment. When you watch Plastic Wars, oh my God, all the toothbrush. There's a scene where there's all the toothbrushes. It's so upsetting, right? And so I have this thing called a Quip, which is an electric toothbrush. It's really cool. It's red. Every 3 months, they just send me a different head, but I keep the handle. So even just things like that, it's like us getting plastic completely out of our lives is really tough, right? It's really pushed on us, but anything you can do to reduce that, also just reducing the energy that you use and really putting a strain on the oil and gas companies, really like turning the knife a little bit, that actually really helps. Like, every time you take public transit instead of taking a car, that actually helps, right? Because you're reducing oil and gas usage. And so that really helps. Also, I switched I live on the Upper West Side. I switched my electric bill to 100% renewable energy, which you can do. And I think I pay a total of $3 more a month, and all of my energy is reusable energy. So it's renewable energy. So there are all kinds of things like that I would just look for small ways that if you can do something once that has a lasting impact. I think those are really, really great things for you to do.
Those are great tips. And I lied. I do have one more question, because there's a few
Yeah.
things I've seen in the chat. People
Oh,
referring to biodegradable, compostable. Are those marketing terms? Are that packaging actually something that we can recycle or reuse?
Oh, great question. No, those are actually more, I guess I would call them agrarian scientific terms. That's what I would call them. That biodegradable literally meaning it breaks back down into its benign components, carbon, hydrogen, you know, that. Compostable meaning if I put it in with, let's say I put it in the landfill, it actually turns into soil, right? Or like we used to have great composting here. I think, Eileen, I think you have composting in your building, right? Because your building got it back together. We used to have this like fantastic New York City. I used to bring all my vegetable scraps. I knew the guy who collected them at my farmer's market. That all had to stop with COVID. I think that will come back. Is it back now? Is it all back? Oh, Eileen, you're on mute.
Some of the budget's coming back.
Yeah, the funding has been restored for it.
Oh my God, how exciting. So I'm going to get on that and find out when it's coming back to my green market, because that is great. So those are things also that you can do. Bringing your food scraps there instead of throwing them in the trash is also, you know, something that's really valuable. But no, compostable and biodegradable are actually bioplastic. That is definitely a marketing term, but biodegradable and compostable actually do have a scientific basis. But that's a great question. Oh, and somebody asked about the razor company. It's called Billie, Billie. I just put that in the chat. There's also one called Athena. So if you just Google like Billie razor or Athena razor, it'll be in there. And then the toothbrush company is called Quip, and their website is getquip.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Krista, for all these tips.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
we're really grateful that you were able to join us to kick this off.
Sure.
And to wrap up, I'll just say that you all will be receiving a Google Group invite. That's a place where we're going to share resources. You can ask more questions like this, and we'll be there to support each other as we try to get through these 4 weeks of reducing our plastic use and as Krista said, being more mindful of the choices that we make. Before we wrap up, I just want to thank everybody on the environmental justice team who helped put this together. Liz, Eileen, Barbara, Jody, Melanie, of course, Sheila, the brains behind all these operations, and of course, Krista for being our guest today. So, and thanks to all of you for being here. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you in the Google group, and we will see you on a weekly basis every Tuesday at 6:30 for a half hour. We're just going to do a quick check-in if you can make it. Share your successes and any issues that you're having, and we'll support each other. So thanks so much, and have a great night, everyone.